Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Future Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Juliette Lamar, and joining us today is Seth Shapiro. He is the founder and CEO at Alpha Networks. Welcome, Seth.
Hi, nice to see you. Nice to talk to you today.
Absolutely. We're so excited to have you on. And I know you've had an exciting week. You just went off to Berlin, so we're going to have to touch base on that, about what you're doing over there. But first off, can you tell us a little bit of an overview about Alpha Networks?
Yeah, I've been working in digital media in Hollywood, New York for about 24 years with a lot of the major networks and distributors and production companies, specifically in TV, but also in other digital areas. And Alpha Networks is a new blockchain-enabled streaming video service powered by Watson AI that will be launching in Q2 of 2019.
Very cool. So I guess I'm still a little bit confused about what it does. So it's blockchain technology, and it's going to be working with things like online streaming video, Netflix. Give us some case scenarios.
Well, there are a lot of genres that actually aren't covered by current content offerings. And there's also, as you probably know, some holes in the current way that streaming video works. For example, a very small percentage of people who do streaming video services can make a living doing it. There are also significantly underrepresented genres. So there's a real opportunity, we think, through the blockchain and through tokenization, and especially powered by AI, to make sort of a more fun, more fair and efficient payment system powered by better data, better analytics, and information for content creators who very often don't get the data and the analytics about how their content is being consumed and by whom. So a lot of times as a creator or a producer, you're flying blind. And even for the larger, most famous streaming services, we have a number of content creators and producers who work with them, and often they get no data about who is in their audience, how their content or their shows are being consumed, by whom, who exactly their target audience is. So by introducing the blockchain into the equation, we're able to build a really powerful dashboard to share with producers, creators, studios, influencers about who is watching their stuff and why.
And that information is critical to create good content that is specific to the people who are watching it. You say on the website here for Alpha Networks that cable is broken. And I think that a lot of our cord cutters today, speaking personally, I don't have a TV. I do not watch channels or anything. I go specifically to Netflix or Hulu or YouTube to seek out the content I wish to view and consume. How are you fixing that problem? In essentially, are you putting together packages for people? Are you just collecting that data and then giving it to the content creators?
That's a really good question. So back to the point about cable. Cable was a really efficient model for a long time. I mean, broadcast was a very efficient model in its time too. But our thesis about the media business is really media has always been technology driven. And so cable was great when honestly there weren't this proliferation of anywhere, anytime, any device choices, and you didn't have internet video, right? So when cable was the only game in town, having 300 networks was sort of wonderful. You had a lot of choices, at least theoretically, but now people are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars a year, thousands, on things that they're never even going to watch. So that infrastructure, it's actually not necessarily anybody's fault. The infrastructure is the infrastructure. And so it's not so easy to turn on a dime. The cable deals that exist today are often, 3, 5, 7-year deals. And the networks that own, or the distributors or studios that own these networks, as you know, tend to bundle them. So we think that the way that the industry is best serviced is by sort of starting from scratch and saying, what's the ideal way for consumers and producers, creators? What's the fairest system for everybody? And that's what we're building. So in some cases, we'll pay you to watch certain content if we think it's going to turn you into a customer longer term for specific offering. Other stuff will be free. other stuff you'll pay for, but it'll be reconfigurable because the architecture that we're building from scratch was meant to be that way in the first place. And cable can't really, it's very hard for, it's kind of the classic innovator's dilemma. It's very hard for a company that's been successful for decades doing things a certain way to turn on a dime and completely reinvent their business model. It kind of has to be a new disruptive company that comes along and does that.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the content creation is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. You see it a lot with films, using the same storylines over and over again, same actors over and over again. You see it in the news cycle where it's just the same stories and headlines being thrown at you. So it's nice that you're breathing a breath of fresh air.
100%. And some of that goes back to data, because you kind of have to feel for the fact that a lot of times studios are operating, I would suggest, they're not going to necessarily say this publicly, but knowing a lot of them, they're operating to some extent in a data vacuum. And so the reason that we see so many sequels over and over and over, and to your point, the same storylines, is because in this world where exhibition is under threat and nobody really can do the sort of global pre-sales necessarily that they used to do, you have to keep the business working and you don't want people to get laid off. So you do whatever you feel relatively comfortable is going to keep the lights on. And so that's why we see the reason people keep making the same movies and over and over again is because those are the ones that worked, that kept the studios profitable. And so they'll take some risks and try some different things. But over the course of history, it's really interesting because movies used to be the place for grand artistic expression or independent thought or new vistas and exploring new themes, societal themes, cultural themes, values. And television was the place of sort of the cookie cutter, same thing over and over again. And it's really fascinating because in many ways that's reversed now.
Oh, absolutely. I find myself drawn to much more of, the Hulu original content, Netflix original content coming out at me than I am films. I see films that I think might be interesting, but at the same time, I typically end up a little disappointed because I know that that's the case, is that they're putting so much money into a film, they need it to succeed. And why would they take a risk on something that's that big budget when they could take a risk on something that's a little smaller, like a TV show? But I love the way the creativity has shifted in that way.
And another interesting aspect of it is that if you just, from having worked in it long enough, the nice thing about from a long-term perspective is for a movie, you get it once and hopefully it's great and you have a big box office and everybody's happy. The investors make their money back. The audience is happy. The performers have a good experience. But in TV, if you get it right, you've got a certain number of years that you can amortize all the costs of doing it. So when TV works, it can work now, especially now that we have, old days of TV. So like 20th century television, I think, and I wrote a book about this, but I think one of the big differences was that in the old days, before we had digital, TV had to be designed so that you could come in at any time, having never seen a show. And in this fourth season of I Love Lucy, you could watch episode 6 and pretty much figure out exactly what was going on. And that was true, through almost every series in the 90s. Like you don't need Cliff Notes to figure out Ross and Rachel on Friends. You can pretty much watch any episode of that show at any time and figure it out. But as technology got better, the creators could start to count on serialization, and they could assume that if you were watching episode 3, you would probably seen episode 2. And that completely changed the nature of the storytelling options on TV. And I think that's one of the reasons that TV got really good, because you had these sort of epic, like in a way, so like on the AFI list, Godfather 1 and Godfather 2 are in the top 5, I think, both. But in a way, The Sopranos is an 86-hour or an 86-part version of a lot of the same themes, plus a lot of stuff. So TV, in some way, when it works, it gets so much more canvas to play with. And then if the audience comes back, obviously economically, it's a lot more lucrative to do something smaller that you get, 50 different pieces to monetize rather than just one.
No, absolutely. The marketing and advertising potential for a successful show such as The Sopranos that can run for an infinite amount of time if it wants to is huge. Do you find that the people and the audience has changed in this new digital age in their wants and needs of content? And also, with reality TV coming in too, and it's kind of a separate thing, but I feel like the audience itself and what they want has also changed.
Well, that's a really good question, and they are two completely different things. But since you mentioned Hulu, let's take that one. So I remember being in Warren Littlefield's office while he was making Fargo, and they were starting The Handmaid's Tale. And it's just interesting how TV, when it works, can sort of plug into a cultural moment in a way that nothing else can. Because I mean, you read reviews of Handmaid's Tale, and overwhelmingly people sort of look at it as an allegory to things that are going on, now. And there's a real power of that to TV. Like there was I think that there was a really great moment, and it's better to be lucky than good, but it's better to be both. There was one moment, if you remember, in the first season of Mr. Robot, where there was this big hack. There was like a data breach, and obviously the lead character of Mr. Robot is a hacker. So what they wound up doing is the Ashley Madison story broke right around the time that episode aired. So they were able to basically go into that episode and dub Ashley Madison in. And so when you watched it live, you had this sort of shock of anew where, wow, this dramatic series that was obviously shot a long time ago was hitting this theme that was like just right out in the air that week. And I think when TV is really good, that's an amazing thing that it can do. Sort of like music used to do that a lot, at the high point of the 60s or whatever, when this song would seem kind of capture the a certain summer or a certain year. But I think TV really has that ability more than any other medium now to really get at that. And I think that's something that people increasingly turn to it for. It feels like we think about Walter White being, this character who can't afford health care and is working really hard. And I mean, the reason the show worked so well partially was because people sympathized with the guy. And that's why they were able to go on that ride with him for so many years. If you tried to do Breaking Bad in 1992, forget about it. It never would have worked. So there's this amazing thing that TV can kind of hold up a mirror to the times in a certain way.
Oh, I absolutely love Breaking Bad, and I love Walter White's character. He is such a beautifully constructed character. And then another example is Handmaid's Tale, when they had the episode where the child's being taken away. Not to give anything away, certain people are being taken away from certain people. But I remember watching that episode, and it hit me so hard because I usually, something you're watching is hard to take, and you're like, well, this is just a TV show, and you kind of take yourself out of it emotionally. And I couldn't, because I was thinking, this is literally happening right now on the border. And it's quite phenomenal, and I guess lucky, how a lot of these shows are mirroring our own existence. And I think in this age where people are a little more disconnected, we're more connected than ever, but also disconnected, that having it hit a real note and affect us in a real way is more addictive than ever, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think part of the reason that people are increasingly, to your original question, which was really good, why, what's going on with dramatic series and the culture, the faster things change, the more people kind of need a way to make sense of it. And you want a collective way to make sense of it, right? So if you can, the kind of a show or something that can give you a collective sense of, okay, this is what we're all living through together now. And this actually sounds, in some ways, if you haven't watched the show, like a silly example. But I have a friend, an amazing director named Michael Reimer, who was the lead director on Battlestar Galactica. And if you remember the sci-fi one, not the old one, which was a really good show. And they had this running motif in that show of this area of the ship that was a remembrance for all of the people who had died on Earth. And it was, a direct allusion to 9/11. But it was extraordinarily powerful. That show just tapped into this kind of, I think, sense of mourning that people had still around the time that it was airing. And a lot of people, certainly in New York, were still trying to make sense of that. And there were still, obviously, a lot of memorials at the World Trade Center. So you had this science fiction show that was able to kind of capture the feeling of that. And I think when TV's really good, that's one of the things it can do really well.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we could talk about these shows all day, because it's a very passionate thing that people people consume on a daily or weekly basis. But bringing it back to Alpha Networks, you guys are providing so many different solutions, right? I mean, you're providing transparency for the economics. You've got reduced piracy. I'm assuming that is because of the blockchain that you're using. What are some of the other like ecosystem provisions that Alpha Networks is giving?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we were doing is talking to producers from more typical YouTube influencers to major TV producers and saying, in a perfect world, what would a platform that would be great for you look like? What would you like to see in a platform? And there are a number of things that come up. One is, it's interesting. It's not obvious, but if you think about YouTube, a YouTube style platform versus a Netflix style platform versus an iTunes style platform, YouTube is completely driven by advertising, for almost completely. Netflix is obviously a subscription-driven platform, and iTunes is called the TVOD. So there's AVOD, SVOD, and TVOD. One is advertising, one is transaction, and one is subscription. Like with Apple, you go and you buy this one thing, or you buy a movie or whatever. So why are they not available all on one platform so that a creator can do some things one way and some things another way? So that's one of the things we're doing. We're working with some of the esports folks to figure out the kind of things that they want to see on that platform. And it does feel like, I think that streaming video platforms are really just starting to hit their stride. It just is so much, no matter where you go in the world, people want to watch what they want to watch, where they want to watch it, on the device that they want. And I think that trend just picks up more and more momentum as we go on. Shockingly, the market cap of Netflix is actually larger than that of the Walt Disney Company. So Disney owns ABC and ABC and Pixar and Marvel and the entire Star Wars franchise and Walt Disney Pictures and all of the parks. Netflix actually is valued by the public markets as being worth more than that. And the reason is because the shape of the future is going to be dictated by these new methods of delivery much more than it's going to be about watching ESPN on a big screen. And so that's what we're doing. We're digging in, and we have some great partners. IBM is a partner in our effort. Radical Media, who I think are one of the most interesting production companies in the world, are partners. And so it's the reason we call it Alpha Networks is sort of like in the sense of alpha versus beta, or it's a laboratory where we get to really try to put together the most interesting, compelling value propositions for the audiences and the creators of now, rather than the way that things were 20 years ago, which tends to be the way that things run on the legacy systems that they inherited. And as I said, that's hard to change. So we're trying to build the future one brick at a time.
That's the way to do it. That's one of the only ways that you can possibly do it. So if people want to learn more about Alpha Networks, they want to check out any of your social media platforms, tell us where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you. So it's www.alphanetworks.io. I think the newsletter, I'm on the road in Europe and Asia right now, but I think the newsletter that we've started will start going out next week. So there'll be a lot of information in there, and people can just sign up right from there. We have a presence on all the usual suspect social media platforms, but probably the best thing to do is to go to the site, check it out, and subscribe to the newsletter. There's a video there. People will get the idea. And if they have content offerings or they're looking for new models, they should reach out to us too. Love to see new creators.
Absolutely. Well, Seth, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. And we'll definitely have to have you back in the future. You have so many different projects up your sleeve. We will be talking with you soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
That is Seth Shapiro. He is the founder and CEO at Alpha Networks. Again, you can find them at alphanetworks.io and on all the usual suspects of social media. This has been Juliette Lamar with Future Tech Podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.